Yeah. All you sub promoters are janky. Stab the Yankees.
All right, Brian.
Welcome to the emergency podcast with the Bronx Bomber blog. Obviously, today was a tough loss with the Yankees losing this one late 3-1, and the Orioles doing a good job rallying off down with the Matanzas. And after the rain delay, they rallied off of Chapman. Now, today we'll break down the game as well as go into a few topics that have been bothering the writers of the BBB lately. And now I'll pass it off to our co-founder, Chad Rains, in his UNC gear.
That's right. My name's Chad Rains. I am wearing my UNC gear because my school won national championships in lacrosse in both men's and women's, so I was pretty excited about that. Obviously, I'm a baseball fan. Obviously, I'm a baseball fan first, but that was pretty cool to see. Also, clearly the intro music was New Drake. I know Steve and I were both excited about that. Big Drake fans, we share that connection. But anyways, it was a very tough loss for the Yankees today. They were up 1-0, and then they had a 97-minute rain delay with the 1-0 lead, and pretty much when they came back, everything went downhill. Chapman entered for a 5-out save, and he kind of got hit a little bit, and it just everything went downhill. It was a tough loss. You don't really want to see the back end of the bullpen blow it like that, but I can't really say it's a long season because we are at June 5th and not much has changed. Steve?
Yeah, it was a very tough loss, especially when you look at they had a decent amount of hits throughout the course of the game, and they really should have capitalized on a bunch of opportunities. One of them that really sticks with me is in the top of the 7th inning. They had second and third with 2 outs, and Brian McCann literally just could have bunted it down the third base line, had a hit, scored a run, but he instead decided to pull it as he always did. And big surprise, he popped up and nothing else happened, and the Yankees didn't score another run, and they lost.
So it says here that the Yankees went 1 for 11 with runners in scoring position today. Per usual, they hit less than 100 today. For the season, they're hitting 219 with runners in scoring position, which is second to last in the major leagues. They also left 10 runners on base. So that was, as the storyline goes for the whole season, the Yankees didn't hit with runners on in scoring position. They had 10 hits and they scored 1 run. So that's pretty unacceptable.
Agreed. I think it just goes back to the whole. I don't know if it's the team philosophy. I know that you wrote in the past about firing the hitting coach. But that leads me to thinking, maybe it's the manager and it's not the hitting coach, because we've been through 3 hitting coaches in the last 3 years. And I think they've actually progressively gotten worse if you look at the offensive statistics, with the exception of the first half of last season, of course. So I just think we need a new approach towards hitting. Mainly on manufacturing runs as opposed to...
I actually tweeted from the BBB that this team needs some major changes going forward if they want to win, and we're definitely going to dive into some of those major changes that we either hope to see or that we think are actually going to happen, because there is like a lot of chance. The Yankees, I think at this point you can definitely make the argument that they're going to be sellers. There's going to be some people that say, there's always going to be the Yankee apologists that don't want to sell regardless of the circumstances, but I think you have to come to terms with the fact that this team is not winning the World Series in 2016. They just don't have the pitching depth. They don't have a sustainable lineup. They can't score runs. So when you're facing teams' best pitchers in October, I don't see how you're going to win a World Series in that situation.
Well, yeah, I wrote a little bit about this in my last piece, titled "Let's Face It: The 2016 Yankees are not a very good team," and it basically goes back to this whole notion of fake contending, which is what we've seen from 2013 up until the present. They've been good enough where they could stay in the race long enough to give the fans some sense of false hope, even though we all knew they really weren't good enough to go very far into the playoffs. However, this season, I think we're seeing a change because they're not even staying within the realm of fake contending. And I could see this getting ugly very quick, which is why even if they are hovering around 500 at the trade deadline, they should become sellers and move whatever pieces possible to get some return back.
Yeah,
Yeah, and going off of what Steven said about trading pieces away at the deadline, we look at the performance of Chapman today. Obviously not great, but let's start off with Dellin Betances, who's given up 6 earned runs in the last 4 1/3 innings pitched, and that's 4 straight outings where he's given up more than 1 earned run. We've seen his ERA go from 1.93 to now over 3.5, and that's a huge concern, obviously, as we've seen. A lot of Yankee fans are obviously concerned about him overusing, him being Joe Girardi overusing Betances, and I think that's something that we're seeing here. And then now going to Chapman, I actually found an interesting factoid. So he was obviously asked to get 5 outs today, and the last 2 times he's been asked to provide the team with more than 5 outs, he's blown the save each time, and that's something that it's obviously to keep an eye on if the Yankees bullpen is getting used over and over every day. You know, like we saw Miller yesterday having to come in a 7-0 game. But yeah, let's pass it on to Chad now, who I'm sure wants to give his take on the Yankees selling at the deadline if they're not contending.
Yeah, so at this point in time, the Yankees are 26-30, 6.5 games out of first place behind Baltimore and Boston. And in the wild card, they are also 5 games back of Seattle. So, I hate the argument that, there is plenty of time for the Yankees. If they get hot, they could definitely reverse the 5-game lead. But like I said, when you have a lineup that is hitting .219 with runners in scoring position, they're not manufacturing runs. You've got dead pool guys in the lineup like Brian McCann, A-Rod, they shift on sometimes.
A-Rod's been better since he got off the deal.
He has. Even Jacoby Ellsbury gets shifted on from time to time, depending on the team. I mean, you can't build a lineup with guys who rely on pulling the ball. Obviously, you want to hit to your strengths, like I said, and if your strength is to hit the ball out of the ballpark, that's what you got to try to do. But at the same time, if Brian McCann can just back off the plate a little bit and kind of punch one into left field, that's not a bad thing for the team. I would much rather him get on base than pop out in the infield trying to hit a 3-run home run or whatever the situation is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. I just don't know. I just feel like with the current cast of characters that are in the lineup, I don't really know if that's attainable at this point. Because you have all these guys, veterans, who have played for many years doing, hitting as they've hit, and they've been relatively successful. However, expecting them to just change, I would like to see them change, but I think it's more so stubbornness. We saw it with Teixeira for a while. I mean, in the beginning of this year, I don't know if you made the same observation, but he was hitting well for maybe the first 2 weeks before he started becoming an important mess. But he actually punched the ball the other way a couple times. He had, I think, 2 opposite field homers, and I saw him purposely trying to do that, which I thought was an encouraging sign heading into the season. Obviously, he's hurt, so we won't see the result of that for a while. But I think it would be nice to see other players start performing like that. I just don't know whether or not it's realistic until we have a complete turnover, which won't happen until 2018, 2019.
Right, so Teixeira had 3 home runs in his first, it looks like 7 or 8 games, and obviously his last home run came on April 13th. And like I said, he's hurt, so we're not going to talk about him that much. But I guess since we're on the topic of discussion, we might as well talk about Yankee life after Teixeira, because as we know, he is in a contract year, and once again he's hurt, which has always been to make a pun out of it, it's always been his Achilles heel that he's always been injured. And obviously he's got a knee injury right now, which could cost him a season. And, Mark Teixeira has been an incredibly productive guy since he came in 2009. Even today, he's still one of the best fielding first basemen in the league. But when you're hitting less than 200 and you're going to turn 37, I just don't see how the Yankees can bring him back with Greg Bird waiting in the wings.
Yeah, well, I remember when Greg Bird first got hurt. I remember a lot of us at the BBB were worried because we expected a Teixeira injury. Personally, I didn't really think initially it was a big deal because I thought, heading into a contract season, Teixeira would really try to do his best to perform well. I mean, obviously, you can't help things like injuries, but I just feel like usually players tend to not get hurt in contract years. Obviously, we were wrong. I guess the only good thing about this with Bird being on the deal is, with Bird already being on the deal and now Teixeira on the disabled list, of course, is we get to see more of Rob Refsnyder. He's obviously not a natural first baseman, and that won't be his position by any means, but just having his bat in the lineup and knowing that he'll be in the major leagues, considering as fans we've wanted to see him get consistent playing time for quite a long time, is going to be quite advantageous to the team and to him as well, because maybe we'll discover something.
Right. And definitely I agree with you. A lot of Yankee fans were, including myself, were kind of downplaying the Greg Bird injury. But the reason that's so significant is because this year was a year for Greg Bird where he could come in and not have a lot of pressure, and he could still learn from Teixeira and still play like every second day, every other day, get spot starts in preparation for starting every day in 2017. And now at this point, if you don't bring Teixeira back, which I just can't see it happening unless he takes a significant pay cut. And then that's going to put a lot of pressure on Greg Bird, who's going to be coming back from a pretty bad injury. And he's going to be a question mark for next year because, he hasn't had a lot of time in the major leagues, and now he's going to be thrown into first base every day for the Yankees. At least we would assume, unless something crazy happens. But yeah, that's the deal with the Greg Bird injury. And I think a lot of Yankee fans are starting to see how substantial of an injury that was and how much that actually did hurt the team.
I'd assume you're.
I think Brian wants to come back to mention Dustin Ackley real quick.
I was just about to transition into him, but if Brian.
I'll just go really quickly. But obviously, with Teixeira out, people thought, well, let's go with Ackley. Even though Ackley's been struggling at the plate, he's still a natural first baseman, and I would definitely trust him over Rob Refsnyder. I know Chad is a big UNC guy, and Ackley went to UNC, so I think he was pretty distraught at the injury. But I wanted to go back and take a look at James's article. Actually, he published an article yesterday on Mark Teixeira, and it was interesting because he said something along the lines of, if the Yankees could look into signing Teixeira for a one-year contract, just in case Greg Bird isn't back yet. But I feel like Teixeira's going to want something a lot longer than that, just for security, financial security, as well as just with the team. So I don't think he would be very open to that. And I definitely do hope that Bird is back, and if he can start on opening day in 2017, that'd be the best case for the Yankees. Steven?
You basically said everything that I wanted to say, so that's good.
So yeah, obviously I'm a big Ackley fan. He did go to UNC. But I'll be the first to admit that Ackley was not performing. Doesn't take a genius to see that. He also wasn't hitting above 200. And I think a lot of that in the beginning was him not getting consistent playing time. But then he started playing more consistently, and there was really no excuse for his poor play, and then he had a tough luck injury. So, he's another guy who might not even be back next year. But I think, he does bring a lot of versatility to the table. If they don't re-sign Teixeira, you could also bring back Ackley, and then him and Bird could get some playing time at first, and, Ackley can play second base, he can play outfield, so we'll see going forward. We don't know how severe his injury is yet, but obviously there's more detail. We do know he's getting surgery, so he's going to be out for the season, but yeah.
So I don't know if you'd like to transition towards, potential trades that we'd like to make regarding which players would be more marketable at the deadline. I specifically was wondering, when we were looking at the bullpen, if you had to pick either Betances, Miller, or Chapman to trade, what would you think would be the most, realistic option that could also net us the biggest return? Because personally, I know Chapman's a free agent, but I think Chapman's a natural fit in New York. He brings fans into the stadium. You could tell there was just some kind of atmosphere there. As soon as he came back, you had all the fans down at home plate. Like, you hadn't really seen anything like that for the last, 4 or 5 years. And I just feel like losing him, it wouldn't be smart for business for the Yankees. I think Miller's been an absolute stud. So that leaves me with the option of Betances, who by far he's been erratic at times, and he's the most unpredictable of the three of them. And I also think because he's under contract for a couple more years, trading him would net us the big return. What do you guys think about that?
So I actually had an article idea that I was potentially going to write on Aroldis Chapman, and it's interesting because if we're talking about the guy who's most likely to get traded, I will say Aroldis Chapman is the most likely to get traded because he is in a contract year. He'll be a free agent, and if the Yankees don't have an intention to re-sign him, then I think he will be traded. But I think if the guy who is the most valuable in the trade deadline for the Yankees is going to be Andrew Miller because he's locked up for 2 more years after this. And I don't see any team trading their top prospects for a half-year rental for a reliever. I know Chapman is so dominant, but I mean, he's a relief pitcher. Like, obviously, those aren't in high demand. You're going to give your top guys for a top-line starter. And if you're getting a half-year rental of Chapman for even 2 or 3 months, I don't think you're going to get top guys for him. At the same time, I do think Chapman will ultimately be traded, but it wouldn't surprise me if Miller gets traded, and that'd be another UNC guy that is now no longer a Yankee, if that's the case. Brian?
Yeah, I think realistically, I mean, personally speaking, I think I would rather see Chapman go, just because I really find that Miller's been more reliable this year. I mean, if you go back and look at the outings since Chapman's been back, I think Miller's done a much better job. And also, obviously, he's a much more professional guy. I mean, he handled being demoted to the 8th inning guy so well. But, I mean, like, I agree with Chad on the point that teams will most likely, well, the Yankees will get the best return off Miller, obviously, and I'm curious to see if maybe they even could trade both. I doubt they'll trade both, but I know the Giants and the Nationals are 2 teams that are already in the hunt for both players, so that's something to keep an eye on for sure.
Definitely, yeah. And also, if we're talking about starting we haven't mentioned starting pitchers yet, but I know the Cubs are also going to be buyers because they're going all in. They're trying to end their World Series drought this year, so that's a potential fit. If we're talking like sleeper trades, like Eovaldi or Nova.
They want Eovaldi.
Yeah, they want Eovaldi. But would you be willing to trade somebody? Because I feel like Eovaldi is one of the few players we have that, as we move into the future, would be valuable to us. Do you think we should just be looking at trading the veterans, or trying to trade the guys who could be a part of our future?
That's another interesting topic for sure.
Yeah, Eovaldi, I believe, has team control because he's due for arbitration next year. So I mean, that's the same thing as what Donovan Tance is going to be going through during the offseason as well. So I would like to see the Yankees keep Eovaldi. I mean, he's shown enough signs this season that I do have trust in him going in. I put him still number 3 in the rotation right now just because CC and Tanaka have been so good this in the first half of the season. I don't know, Chad and Steve, you guys want to expand on that?
I'd put him ahead of CC, but yeah, you're right.
I just recently wrote a piece about Nathan Eovaldi and how it's time to jump on the bandwagon because I know personally I was such a big hater of Nathan Eovaldi. He had always been a thrower as opposed to a pitcher, and this year finally he's showing signs of being a pitcher. His last outing wasn't that great, but like I said, he had an absolutely spectacular month of May, and I think he could get a decent return because he does have so many years of control. But this is pure speculation. I know teams have interest in Nathan Eovaldi, but it's kind of up in the air whether they'll trade him or not.
Yeah, similar to you, I was also a pretty big Eovaldi hater, primarily because they had to give up Prado to get him, and I thought Prado was really the perfect pick because he basically did a little bit of everything. I just don't know if trading – Eovaldi seems to have really found his own recently, and I feel like if we were to trade him now, that could be a huge mistake for the franchise moving forward if he were to develop into a frontline starting pitcher. Again, this is all conjecture, but if it were to happen – it might be something we'd regret down the line.
Right, yeah. I agree with that. And I mean, we could literally go down the list and talk about every player and their trade value. Because if the Yankees do become a team that's a seller, they do have some valuable commodities on their roster. Beltran's another one. Yeah, we can talk about him, and then we'll pretty much wrap it up after that. So Steve, you mentioned Beltran, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mentioned Beltran in my article that I wrote as well. I just feel like Beltran going into a contract year and being that he's one of the greatest postseason hitters of all time, somebody will want him. Somebody mentioned, I don't remember who it was, but mentioned in reference to my bringing up Beltran in the article that he might be a good fit on the Royals. That would be pretty interesting. Again, I don't really know how much we'd get back for him. But we know he won't be here next year, and we know the Yankees aren't going to win the World Series this year. So any type of return, even if it's a B-level prospect, I think would be a good return.
Yeah, he's not only in a contract year, he's potentially in a career year because this might be his last season as a major leaguer. And the Kansas City connection is definitely interesting for him to go back to where he started his career. switch hitter, great in the postseason, clutch. Yeah, you would get like a B or C prospect for him, but so nothing crazy. But yeah, he's definitely one to potentially be traded. I guess Brian can come back and wrap it up because we're pretty much done here.
Yeah, we look at, so obviously we've talked about McCann possibly being in the trading block as well, but something to keep an eye on is that Gary Sanchez, who obviously was a top prospect at AAA, he's injured right now, I believe, and I think there's still no timeline for him to return. So if you trade away McCann, there's no backup catcher and might be someone from AAA, which could be interesting. And then obviously with Carlos Beltran, the one thing I do like about the Yankees is that their outfield depth is good, especially in AAA. They have Jake Cave, they have Dustin Fowler at Trenton, they have obviously Aaron Judge. That's a given for sure. Hopefully we'll see him in pinstripes later this year. That's something that I'm probably going to stick around for, even if the Yankees are out of contention. But that looks like that's it. If there's any final thoughts from Chad and Steven on this Sunday night.
I think just one brief thing. Sorry to cut you off, Chad. But I think that moving forward, especially if we do deal some of the veterans, and quite frankly, even if they don't, we should see a lot of the young guys getting more playing time, because this is the time, when we're going, even though the Yankees front office doesn't want to admit it, we're in the middle of a transition, and this is the time that the younger guys who could potentially be a part of the future should be getting some requisite playing time and showing who they are. So that's something I like to see going forward. Again, they could turn it around in the next month, and this conversation will be pointless. Who knows? But in all likelihood, that won't happen.
Yeah, there's nothing we've seen that shows the Yankees are going to turn it around. If we're being just completely honest, they are in the bottom 5 in basically every major offensive statistical category. And I'm reading a book right now that it's called Damned Yankees. It's about the 1970s and 80s, pretty much the shit show that was the New York Yankees. And they actually constantly make references to the Yankees being the Bronx Burners instead of the Bronx Bombers, and I think that's kind of true this year because the Yankees are 21st in home runs and they're pushing the top 10 in stolen bases, which is pretty ironic. Not really related, but I just decided to share my 2 cents on that. I do agree with Steve. I think the young guns should definitely we should start seeing some young guys getting called up, and because if the Yankees can't turn it around, they are going to be sellers. They're going to help other teams out and help themselves out, because I think at this point you are playing to 2017, 2018, and then potentially becoming really good in 2019 and 2020, which is a long way away, but that might be the window that the Yankees are looking at.
Yeah, I mean, the only optimism that I even have, even just the barely slightest, is the fact the Yankees don't play a team with a winning record for the next 18 games. So if this will really tell their season if they can turn it around and maybe get back into the thick of things. But we should just start a countdown for the days until Bryce Harper becomes a Yankee. Exactly.
That's right.
All right, but that's it for the Sunday night edition of Bronx Bomber Block podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you all hopefully next week, if not the week after.